Today, we're going to start a new series on the purposes of God and how God calls each of us into his purposes. And we're going to look at a passage right at the beginning of the Bible, because God has a purpose for your life. Your life is not without meaning. And your purpose is not just survival and is not pleasure. Your purpose is something that God can give you for something truly significant. And each of us, I think, have within us these three questions that we're always asking. Whether we realize it or not, I think we're always asking these three questions about our purpose, which is, what should I be doing? Who am I meant to be? And who am I supposed to love? These are the big questions. What am I supposed to do? The big questions of career and the life direction, but also day to day. What should I be doing? Who am I supposed to be? Who am I really? It's a search for identity. And then, who am I meant to love? There's questions of, should you get married? If you get married, who you should marry? Who has God put in my path? Who am I meant to love? What am I supposed to do? Who am I supposed to be? And who am I meant to love? I know there are other questions like, what should I eat? Or what should I wear? Actually, that's quite an easy question for me, which is the same thing I wear every Sunday. The same trousers and one of two shirts that I think are smart enough for Christchurch. So that's an easy question. But I know there are other questions, but these are the fundamental questions of our purpose. And the reason we ask these three questions is because we are made in the image of God. So let's look at this passage. At the beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, the first chapter of the whole Bible, and verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, and they will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. God has made us for a purpose. And the first purpose, the first thing we are made, the purpose, is to do. We are made to do certain things. And I know my Portuguese is almost quasi-fluency. So we are made to do certain things. Because the image of God is something which is functional. It's about a role that we are supposed to take up. So in the ancient world, the image of God was language that would have been familiar to those reading these stories when they were first written. But they referred to certain people. They referred to the Pharaoh of Egypt and to the king of Assyria. The kings of the great empires thought themselves to be in the image of God, and that meant that they ruled the world, or ruled their kingdom, on behalf of God. But what the Bible says is this doesn't just apply to the kings, or queens, or emperors, or presidents, or prime ministers. This actually applies to every single human being has a role for this world. And there are things that we are supposed to be doing. It is functional. And the role is to fill the earth, to subdue it, to rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the sky and every living creature. What are the things that we should be doing? Well, we're to do the things that God commands us to do. God's purpose emerges from his commands, from his voice. God speaks and says, this is what you are supposed to do. If you want a great purpose for your life, if you want to have a greater sense of meaning and purpose, then the first thing we do is open ourselves to the voice of God. Obedience leads to purpose because it is commanded. It is not self-generated. This is not something we get to decide for ourselves. This is something that God commands. And it is external to ourselves. So God says your purpose is the world. You exist not just for your own sake, but for the sake of the world around us. Because the temptation is to think that our lives are about ourselves. And actually the definition of sin, which is everything that's wrong with the world, everything that's wrong with you and me, given by Martin Luther, the great reformer, was a heart curved in on itself, where we think everything is about ourselves. But God gives us a purpose by turning us inside out towards the world. You were made for the sake of other people, for the sake of the world. It is external to you. So it's commanded, it's external, and it means taking responsibility. So when God says, he says that human beings are to rule. Now this might feel a bit uncomfortable, the sense that human beings are to rule over the whole of creation. But rulers are the ones who are responsible and who are held responsible. And that is so important for you and for me. Every time we say to ourselves, it's nothing to do with me, not my responsibility, that is being less than human. But when God calls people in the Bible, it's very often to take up responsibility that they did not think that they had. So when God calls Moses, Moses thought the Hebrews living in slavery, not his problem anymore. But God calls him and says, no, actually, this is your responsibility. When God calls Gideon, with the problem of the Midianites enslaving his land and exploiting them, Gideon thought, that's not my problem to sort out. But God calls him and says, no, actually, it is your problem. When God calls Esther, Esther felt like the fate of the Jews living in the Persian Empire was not her responsibility. But God calls her and says, actually, no, this is your responsibility. Calling often emerges when something that previously we thought, actually, this has nothing to do with me, when actually we say, actually, this is something I need to take responsibility for. And it is significant. God says in these verses that we are to behave like kings and queens. We are to have a significant purpose. And so the danger in life can be not so much doing the wrong things, but doing the insignificant things. I mean, the devil, the enemy, will try to tempt us to do things that are wrong, things that hurt people, hurt God, hurt ourselves. But if he cannot get us to do the things that are wrong, he'll try and get us to do the things which are just a waste of time. When Facebook first emerged into the world, and people started signing up, I was quite resistant. I didn't think I really wanted to be part of the Facebook world. But then I thought, okay, I'll join in with what everyone else is doing. And so I joined Facebook, and then one day I was on Facebook and a video appeared. And I started watching it. And it was a video of a man putting on a pair of jeans without using his hands, using only a series of lunges. I don't know whether anyone's seen this. And it was fascinating. It was remarkable. And he achieved it. Just through lunging, doing a series of splits, he managed to have these jeans which were on the floor and managed to get them all the way up his legs. And it was impressive and it was fascinating on one level. But 5.5 minutes later, I wondered, what have I done? What am I doing with my life? This is a complete waste of time. And the danger is that we can find ourselves wasting our life with the things that aren't really important. Do you remember the first Iron Man film? Probably it was quite a long time ago now, probably 20 years ago. But in the first Iron Man film, Tony Stark, this playboy billionaire, is saved, his life is saved in Afghanistan. And the man who saves him ends up dying, but just before he dies, Tony Stark says to him, "You saved me." And the man says to him, "Now don't waste it. Don't waste your life." And in the same way, Jesus has saved each one of us. And then he says to us, don't waste it. Don't waste your life. And so we are called to things that are significant. William Carey, the great missionary to India, said, "I am not afraid of failure. I'm afraid of succeeding in things that don't matter." We are called to what's significant, but not what's worldly significant, not what's impressive to other people. We're called to do the significant things, which are often the invisible things. I mean, getting up early to pray, that is really significant. Going to talk to someone who's on their own on a Sunday morning before church begins, that's really significant. Inviting a friend on Alpha, that's really significant. Many, many years ago, a man called Martin did Alpha. And then after he'd finished Alpha, he'd had such a good time that he invited one of his closest friends called Tara to do Alpha. And Tara did Alpha, she became a Christian. She started working for the church that she did Alpha at. Then she met Jonny and fell, as you could imagine, fell madly in love. And then they had 4 children and they moved to Rio. Now, Martin may have thought it was a tiny thing inviting his friend Tara on Alpha, but actually it was hugely significant. Do not waste your life, but do the things that God is asking you to do. And that is our first purpose. But even more important than what we do is who we are. Because we are called to do, and we are called, even more important than that, we are called to be. So when God creates human beings in the image of God, there's a functional element about this. It's about what human beings are supposed to do. But it's also about their identity. The theological term would be it's functional, it's also ontological. It's about our being. It's about who we are meant to be. And we are meant to be in the image of God. People have often said that we are moving from a word-based culture to an image-based culture. But actually, we were always supposed to be an image-based culture. And we are the most powerful image that can ever be. And so your character is your calling. And this is really important when things go wrong, when we feel frustrated, when the things we're trying to do just aren't happening, and we feel stuck. Because in those moments, God is often working on our character. And so when we feel frustrated in what we're trying to do, God is often helping us to be the people that God had always meant us to be. And so if you're looking for your purpose, before we ask ourselves what we're supposed to do, there's the question of who we are meant to be. This is often the theme, actually, in Disney films. Often in Disney films, certainly in the last few years, the protagonist loses their way. Think of The Lion King. The protagonist loses their way, but is only reminded, when Simba's reminded who he is, can he then live out the purpose for what he was created. Or Moana. That is a brilliant Disney film. Moana, she loses her way. She's trying to restore the heart of the ocean or something like that. And then she loses her way. She's not sure what she's supposed to be doing. And she decides to give up. She gives up on her purpose. And then her grandmother comes to her in the form of a stingray. which is, again, quite strange, and then says to her, "You've forgotten who you are." And then Moana starts singing, which I won't sing it, but she says, "Who am I? I'm the girl who loves my island. I'm the girl who loves the sea. It calls me. I am the daughter of the village chief. We're descended from voyagers. Who found their way across the world. They call me. I've delivered us to where we are. I've journeyed farther. I'm everything I've learned and more, still it calls me. And the call isn't out there at all, it's inside me. It's like the tide, always falling and rising. I will carry you here in my heart. You remind me that come what may, I know the way. I am Moana." So, stirring stuff. But she remembers who she is, and then she can live out her calling. But whereas for Moana, she thinks that she needs to obey this voice that's inside of us, for us, we discover our identity, who we are, not so much by looking inside, but by looking upwards. Because the normal way that people find out who they are is either through the people around them, it's the opinions of others, it's the role you're given by the community, it's what your followers and fans think of you, that decides who you are. Or you search inside of you. It's your feelings, it's your desires, it's your ambitions, it's your personality. That defines who you are. But the problem with defining your identity with people around you is you feel like they never quite totally understand who you are. And the problem with basing it on what's inside of you is often there are lots of things which are at war with one another. You want to look after other people, but also you want to look after yourself. You want to treat others well, but also you want to be the best. And there are all these things at war. But actually, what this says is that our identity is those in the image of God. In other words, we only discover who we are in relation to God. It is we look upwards, and then we discover who we are. So our calling is to do. But more important than that, it's to be. But even more important than who we are is the call to love. Because the image of God is not only functional or ontological, it's actually relational. It describes our ability to love God and be loved by him. And because God is love, and he made us in his image so that we can love him in return and love one another. That is what it means to be in the image of God. And so the crucial question is not just, what am I supposed to do and who am I supposed to be? But who is it that you're asking me to love? And the most important of those is to love God. That is the primary relationship we were made for. Because we were made, and we feel this instinctively, we were made for a relationship for a love that's perfect and total and eternal. That's why it's never quite enough if someone says, I love you sometimes, or I love you a bit, or I love your laughter, but I hate everything else about you. That's not quite enough. Something in us wants to be loved perfectly, totally, and forever. And the reason we feel that is because we were made for a relationship with God, who loves us perfectly and totally and forever. But then God also asks us to love those around us. The greatest commandment, Jesus says, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. And when he was asked to define, what does it mean to love your neighbor? He said, well, it's loving the person you find on the street, who's the victim of injustice, who's in poverty, who is in need. It's loving the person you come across, the people you've put into your life. And so the question we're always asking is, who are you asking me to love? Who have you put in my path? This is really important for marriage. Because the crucial question for marriage is not so much, does this person fulfill me, make me happy, complete me? The crucial question is this the person that God has asked me to love? And then say, okay, for the rest of my life, this is the person I'm going to do everything I can to love because this is the one you've given to me. And so this is the most important, and we start here. And the danger is that we start here. Because if we start here just thinking about all the things we want to do, the danger is we can lose ourselves in the process. Or even worse, lose the relationships. We get so consumed by work or even Christian ministry that we find ourselves estranged from the people around us. Or we have such a desire to be authentic and to be truly ourselves that actually we alienate other people and we don't do the things that we should be doing. But instead, we start by being loved. When I was 20, I was at university. I was working quite hard at university. I loved what I was studying. We'd also set up a charity there that was trying to help people who are homeless and help people who are living in poverty. And I was trying to play as much sport as I could and be as sociable as I could. And I thought as a way of doing this, I would just reduce how much sleep I needed. Because I just decided I was going to be a person who needed not very much sleep. And what happened was I developed some lumps on my neck, which was some glands. I got glandular fever, and which I just didn't get better from. And then I got post-viral fatigue, or chronic fatigue. And I just didn't get better. And I had to drop out of university. And so for a year, I spent basically in bed doing not very much, apart from reading when I had the energy for it, or watching high-quality American box sets. The West Wing, 24, do you remember that? Anyway, so that was what I did for a year. But basically, I couldn't do anything. Then a great friend of mine, who acts as a kind of mentor, said, Jonny, the reason you're ill is because you don't know who you are. And you're trying to be something you're not. But I'm glad you're ill because you're about to discover who you really are. And so I wasn't able to do anything. I had no idea who I was anymore because my attempt to be who I was trying to be just hadn't worked. And so all I was left with was this, which was this instinct that God loved me when I did nothing and was nothing. I didn't know who I was and couldn't do anything. And yet God loved me perfectly. And out of that realization that God loved me, even when I could do nothing, I began to discover a bit again who I was. And then from there, I could begin to do some things. And actually, the things I ended up doing weren't very different from what I'd been doing before, but they were on a whole different basis. This is how we're supposed to enter the world. We're supposed to enter the world just being loved when you can do nothing. A tiny baby doesn't have a sense of self and can't do anything very helpful, but is just supposed to be loved. And out of being loved, they come to discover who they are. And out of discovery of who they are, they start doing various things. Jesus, the same. Jesus doesn't do anything very remarkable until he's 30. For the first 30 years of his life, he's just enjoying being loved by God. And then, at his baptism, he has this reassurance of his identity. The Father says, "You are my Son, whom I love, and with you I am well pleased." And out of that love and knowing who he was, then he began his ministry. And so the order is this: love, be, do. Live your life as love, be, do, not do, be, love. And then you'll begin to work out your purpose. Two final things, and then we'll pray. God calls us, he gives us a purpose, and then he provides for us. So when God calls the first human being, says, "Be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it." The next verse, it says, "Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, they will be yours for food. So God calls, and then he provides. Because when we look at all these things, what is God wanting me to do? Who am I supposed to be? Who am I supposed to love? Actually, it feels impossible. But God always calls, and then he provides. This is definitely our experience coming here. We felt a call to Christchurch Rio and to this great city, to this great church, to this great nation. But Tara and I had no sense of how we were going to do it. But we knew that the provision would follow the call. And so we came, and the provision of God, in terms of people, in terms of financial provision, in terms of practical provision, has been way beyond anything we could possibly have imagined. Because God pays for what he orders. And when he calls, he also provides. And so if there is something that you sense God is calling you to do, trust that he will provide everything you need in order to do that. But even this provision is not enough. Because actually we are always failing to be the image of God. And that's why God sent into the world Jesus Christ, who Colossians chapter 1 verse 15 says, he is the image of the invisible God. He is the only one who has done perfectly what should have been done. He's the only person who has been truly themselves. And he is the only one who has loved God perfectly and loved those around him perfectly. He is the image of God. And then Jesus died on a cross. And on a cross, he was nailed to a cross, totally unable to do anything. It appeared that he was a failure. He was disfigured. The most beautiful person who ever lived was totally disfigured. And he was hated and rejected and abandoned. But through his work on the cross, he was actually achieving the greatest thing that had ever been achieved. He was actually more beautiful and more himself than he'd ever been. And he was demonstrating the greatest love that has ever been demonstrated. And because of what Jesus has done, through his death and through his resurrection, through his life and through his ministry, you and I are now able to do these things. Because it says in Corinthians that the Spirit of God is transforming us into the likeness of Christ. The Holy Spirit is enabling us to be like Jesus Christ, to be in the image of God, and therefore to fulfill our purpose.